Hello, sports fans, and welcome to Let Me Speak, the show that shares sports' biggest headlines explained, uninterrupted, and maybe a little audacious. I'm Joe Braverman, and today's topics we'll be discussing are
Duke, North Carolina, Kansas, Villanova. Who should be favored ahead of the Final Four? Plus, breaking down the top of the East and the bottom of the West in the NBA standings. And what would it mean to have Tiger Woods return at the Masters? It's episode 67 of Let Me Speak, and it starts right now. Hello once again, everybody, here on Thursday, March 31st, 2022, the 67th episode. Can't believe we're 67 episodes in on this podcast, Let Me Speak. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in wherever you are getting this podcast. It has been an insane week, and I'm not just talking about the sports world, but I'm talking about me in particular. Some very big, exciting news, at least in my personal world, is I have a new job position. You are looking at the newest part-time radio board operator over at WEEI, Boston's sports radio network. If you don't know, that is the radio station that takes care of the Red Sox game. So if you can't watch it on TV, you turn on that station, and that station will give you the Red Sox game. It's very, very exciting. It's my first job, really first big job since coming out of college at Westfield State, using that degree in communications. And I've just been very, very excited about it. We start next week. I should say I start next week doing a little bit of training. Then we'll get into some shifts. But don't worry, for those of you who are fans of this podcast, I am not going anywhere. We are going to try our best to continue this podcast going. This is a short part-time position. I will have some time to create this podcast, record some segments, edit, and produce it live on all podcasting platforms. So don't worry, this podcast is not going anywhere, but I do have a brand new position that I did want to bring up if anyone was curious. So that's the exciting thing that's happening in me. Let's talk about in general. I mean, nothing is better than springtime if you're talking sports. I mean, you've got the MLB is about to get started. The NBA and the NHL are going into playoffs. The NFL's got a crazy offseason. And then, of course, March Madness. You can't go this whole thing without talking about March Madness. And for what has been going on all season long in men's college basketball, with all the parity, the multiple number ones, the upsets, the Final Four has been, I guess you could call it lackluster in terms of schools that maybe schools that no one was thinking could make it this far, and there'd be sort of a smaller school. But there's a ton of championship experience and pedigree between what is now being called the Blue Blood Final Four. We've got Duke, North Carolina, Kansas, and Villanova. This is the first time ever in the men's college basketball tournament that each school that has had at least 3 national championships on their resume. It's unbelievable, this Final Four. I mean, as I said about lackluster, it's only lackluster because, you have Kansas as a 1, Villanova and Duke are 2s, and then North Carolina is number 8. You'd expect maybe a smaller school that doesn't have a lot of championship experience in terms of the men's field, like a Gonzaga or an Arizona or, something like that, where there's sort of a new team to rise up. But after the Elite 8 and the Sweet 16, we know the Final Four is set with these 4 schools. And I couldn't believe this, that one of the matchups, Duke and North Carolina, this is going to be the first time ever that these 2 teams will meet in the NCAA tournament. I could not believe it, with the amount of history and the rivalry between these two teams. This is the first time ever they meet in postseason play. Postseason in March Madness. I couldn't believe that when I first read about it. But to talk about the games themselves, starting with the Blue Devils and the Tar Heels, I mean, when you have a high profile rivalry like this, there's going to be extra motivation. You know that for sure. You know that North Carolina wants to, avenge their loss at home when Duke came in and beat them. And not only that, but they want to knock out Coach K in his final season and send him into retirement. On the other side, you've got Duke, who's trying to get revenge on North Carolina for coming into Cameron Indoor and basically upsetting Duke in Coach K's final game at Cameron Indoor. And not only that, but eliminate one of their biggest rivals to tie a little bow on Mike Krzyzewski's final season with Duke. So you know there's going to be extra motivation. This is going to be the game. I know, no disrespect to Kansas Villanova, but this is the game that everyone is watching for. Everyone's going to watch it. There's going to be millions of viewers on this one because, I mean, come on. Duke and North Carolina are the Lakers, Celtics, the Red Sox, the Yankees, the Bears, and the Packers. This is the rivalry. And if you put in postseason aspirations, it's only going to get that much more intense. But on the court, the question is, how well can Duke play defense against a strong offense like North Carolina? I mean, the way this offense has been performing for the Tar Heels has been unbelievable in this tournament. I mean, Coach Hubert Davis, this isn't Roy Williams, North Carolina. This is a totally different squad. This is a team that during the tournament are averaging 82.5 points per game and are shooting over 35% from three. So they know how to put in the offense. You've got 4 different leading scorers in 4 different games. So that just shows you the depth and the versatility that this roster for the Tar Heels are. And in watching North Carolina, I've been very impressed with 2 guys in particular. First one is Brady Manick. The senior is averaging 21.5 points per game, 8 rebounds per game on this tournament run. And he's been sort of that offensive juggernaut. He's been sort of all reliable. He's not going to be the leading scorer every single time, but he's going to be the guy that the Tar Heels are always looking for. The second guy I would say to watch for is Armando Bacot. Bacot coming off a 2020 game against St. Peter's. And I know it was a blowout against the Peacocks in the Elite Eight, but so far in 4 tournament games, Bacot is averaging 16.5 points per game and nearly 16 rebounds per game. He's basically averaging the same amount of points as he is rebounds. So that's number one for Duke, is limiting Bacot down low. It's all about the defense and limiting this offense in general, but you start with those 2 guys. Then you throw in guys like RJ Davis, Caleb Love. Again, versatility is what North Carolina has. And I think that's what's going to carry them if they're going to get past Duke and eventually into the national championship. That's what I'm thinking with this Tar Heel squad. For Duke, though, as I said, it is about defense, but also this is a team that's sort of, I was one of those guys who was thinking with the pressure of Coach K's last tournament run, getting beat in the ACC tournament and in Coach K's final game at Cameron, I thought they would succumb to the pressure. But I think what Coach K has done has sort of brought that team back down to earth and has, told them not to worry about the moment, because the big moments have come and gone. You had the big ceremony when it was Coach K's final game, and then you get beat in the ACC tournament. And so far in this tournament run, they've looked really, really good. They beat Michigan State. They beat Texas Tech. They've shown some really good play, and especially from Paolo Banchero. I think if he's that guy on offense, if he's a leading scorer, this Duke team has a really good shot of knocking off their rivals from North Carolina. So that's going to be a game, I think, if anything, I will keep my eyes on the most between those 2. I mean, that's going to be something that, I think it's going to be a classic. I really do think it's going to be a classic between these 2, because let's face it, rivalries bring out the best and sometimes the worst in people. So we'll see what happens with that. But of course, everyone, you have your first matchup, but what about the second matchup? I know everyone's talking Duke UNC, but there's still another matchup in the Final Four. The Jayhawks and the Wildcats And to me, this is a matchup of two teams that have basically been flying under the radar all season long. All season long. No one's talked about it. You've had your Gonzagas, your Dukes, your Baylors, your Arizonas, your Auburns, but lo and behold, here's Kansas, the number one seed, carrying all the momentum from winning the Big 12 conference championship. And they've basically been rolling in every single game. They've been rolling and they've been in control in almost every tournament game. And if you date back to the regular season, they've won 9 straight games. So I think momentum is on the side of Kansas. But I want to talk more about Villanova's side of things, because I think they have the more interesting story. Because let's face it, the Jayhawks pretty much are complete. They're a complete team right now. And the question pretty much since the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight is, how does Villanova adjust their game plan? What does Jay Wright do? Because Justin Moore, that's the big story. Tearing his Achilles during the Elite Eight game against Houston. He's their second leading scorer on the team. Okay, you got Colin Gillespie, who's got over 50 and a half points per game. The next guy, besides Justin Moore, is Jermaine Samuels with 11.1 points per game. So I think offense is going to be it's going to be a struggle for Jay Wright and his squad. I really do think so. It's just a matter of which guys are going to come through and sort of make up for Justin Moore and what he provided on the offensive game. Not only that, but on both sides of the court, how he plays well on offense and how he does well on defense. So we've heard Jay Wright talk about, other guys like another Archie Diacono, guys like that. And this is an experienced coach, okay? Jay Wright is a 2-time national champion, okay? He's won, I want to say, 2 national championships in the span of, first one was 2016, so it's been 6 years. So, in terms of college basketball, it's a juggernaut. Villanova is a juggernaut, and Jay Wright has the experience. So I'm not, totally counting out Villanova just yet, because it seems like every time they try and go for a win, they find a way. They find a different way. So I think that's going to be just as compelling as a game as the first one. But by the time we get to a new episode next week, there will have been a national champion crowned. And, I'm going to go out on a limb right here. I think it's going to be Duke and Kansas in the national championship. Duke and Kansas for the national championship. And you know what? It's just too good of a story to pass up. I think Duke goes all the way. They win the national championship. I really do think so. I mean, this is when you have players that are motivated to win for someone or, a group of people, that is extra motivation. And of course, you have a legendary coach like Coach K. There would be no other way for Coach Mike Krzyzewski to go out than as a national champion. That just seems like too obvious of a story. That basically writes itself right then and there. So I think it's going to be Duke over Kansas this Monday night for the national championship. But the good thing about Final Four, again, as I said last week and the week after that, as I say over and over, March Madness living up to its name. And I am looking forward to watching 2 incredible games in the Final Four in New Orleans so we can crown a champion in men's college basketball. Moving on and sticking with basketball, we go from the college game to the pro game. Let's talk about the NBA. And lo and behold, by next Sunday, the regular season is going to be over and we're already going into the postseason. I mean, honestly, to me, it's a little surprising to see it come out so quick, because normally, on a normal schedule, you'd see hockey playoffs get underway. The NHL would start their playoffs and then the NBA would get theirs underway. But obviously the NHL is a little bit delayed because of, the COVID pause plus the Olympic timeline, et cetera, et cetera. But let's talk about the NBA right now. We're getting into the postseason. Right now, when you look at the standings, all teams, looked like they're pretty much locked, but there's still some jockeying for positions. I mean, honestly, there are only 4 teams right now who have officially clinched playoff spots. Just looking at it real quick. It's Miami, Phoenix, Memphis, and Dallas. Dallas last night clinching their playoff spot. But For this segment, I wanted to talk about kind of a parallel. I want to look at the East and the West, and they're two completely different stories. And starting with the East, the biggest fight you would think are for those last playoff spots, the 8, 9, 10 into the play-ins. That's what it normally is. But the fighting is at the top of the Eastern Conference. I mean, you got 4 teams all within 2 games of the top spot in the Eastern Conference. You got the Heat, the Bucks, the Celtics, and the 76ers all within 2 games of each other. Now, I do think, when you're trying to find the top team in the East, it's really hard to say because you've got these 4 teams that have been playing well since the All-Star break. Then you've got Brooklyn, who's still obviously a threat down there in number 8. But we've talked about Brooklyn all season long. But just looking at the play of all 4 teams so far, I would say right now, at this moment, and things can change, my favorite right now would probably be Milwaukee. I think Milwaukee has to be my favorite. And, when you get closer to postseason time, this is what they've done pretty much in the Giannis Antetokounmpo era, is that they've flown under the radar all season long. And no one talks about how good they are because you have the bigger headlines, like the combination in Philly with Embiid and Harden. You got the struggle of the Nets, who were title favorites and now they're in 8th place, or you got the Lakers or the Warriors or other teams like that. But how about Milwaukee? You got to remember, these are the defending champions of the NBA. This team has a top 3 player in the NBA right now in the Greek Freak, and he hasn't taken a step back at all. Giannis is 2nd in the league in scoring. He's 5th in rebounds, and they're bringing back basically the same squad from last year's championship team. And there are a lot of great two-way players, okay? They haven't had Brook Lopez for a long time now, but he's back in the lineup. You still have Chris Middleton, Drew Holiday, Bobby Portis. This is a team that has the championship experience. I honestly think that Milwaukee right now is the team to beat in the East right now. I mean, look at the game that they had between Philly and Milwaukee. I mean, Giannis with the clutch block at the end on Joel Embiid. If Giannis turns that up, if he's doing what he's doing now, you just touch that up by 10% and he's an unstoppable force, okay? I don't see anyone that can stop the Greek Freak at the role he's been on for years now. And I mean years. Just flying under the radar, no one really talking about him. I think the reason no one talks about him is because, it's the same old story. It's nothing new. It's not like they're turning heads because Giannis has just been doing, his numbers have held steady, slowly getting better, as I mentioned. And they're a team that isn't making a ton of noise because they're not making a big trade or they're not making huge headlines. They're just holding steady, getting guys that just continue to play basketball extremely well. So I think at this moment, and again, as I said, things can change, but right now, Milwaukee is my favorite in the Eastern Conference right now. And then second, I would probably have to say Boston because they are the hottest team in the league right now since the All-Star break. I would say they would be the favorite with the way they've played, but yeah, the Robert Williams injury, which we'll talk a little bit about later on in the show. I think that leaves room for a slight step back, especially what you saw last night in the game against Miami. So I think Boston's probably the second best team with what they've done basically since the All-Star break and pretty much since the new calendar year in 2022. I'd say probably the third best team would probably be Philly right now. I thought they would have been a little bit more dominant than they've had. I mean, you look at the record right now, they're 46-29. They're 11-6 since the James Harden trade, and they've just struggled recently. I mean, you got back-to-back losses against the 2 top teams in each conference, Phoenix and then Milwaukee. And I think when you look at Philly, I think the talk of it has to be the supporting cast. That's what Philly has. They've tried to do it for years. They've tried to do rely on Joel Embiid and then at the time Ben Simmons for most of their offense. And you're seeing guys like Tobias Harris not really step up or in recent years, So the supporting cast can't be relying on their two all-stars or virtuoso MVPs. So you just have to find that third consistent scorer. And we've seen it go back and forth so many times from Tobias Harris, from Tyrese Maxey. I think the problem with that is when there isn't a consistent third scorer, you've got your top players who are changing the way they're playing. And to me, James Harden is kind of shying away from being a bigger facilitator. I mean, when you look at the numbers that he has, he's still flirting with triple doubles, but he's doing way more scoring than he should. He's trying to be a facilitator as much as he can, but he's becoming a bigger scorer. And we've seen, in the past probably year and a half, eventually since the trade from Houston, that he's a triple threat. He's a triple double. He could have a triple double every single night. But the problem is that, that I think is going on is that Harden sees the scoring struggle from the rest of his supporting cast, and he's just got to pick things up a little bit. Now, I'm not saying that they're totally out of it, but I'm just saying that until Philly finds a consistent third scorer that they can rely on when the double teams are coming to Joel Embiid, when James Harden is passing the ball as best he can, where's that third option? Who's that third option? And is it going to continue to be sort of a flip-flop and interchanging all these starting lineups? So that's what I want to see from Philly at the beginning of the postseason, end of the regular season. I want to see what they do there. And then I would probably say Miami is the fourth. And it's nothing against Miami because they've played great all season long. They've dealt with a ton of injuries just coming in back and forth. But when you've seen it over the last week, and I'm not going to include the game last night against Boston because that was a different story, but they had lost 4 straight before winning against Sacramento. And you saw it last week with the argument between Jimmy Butler, Coach Eric Spoelstra, and Udonis Haslem. It's a team that's frustrated with not playing the way they were at the beginning of the year. That's really all it is. It's nothing that's falling apart. I don't think they're falling apart. This is just a team that's still trying to figure out the rotation. We've seen a lot of juggling from the lineup with head coach Eric Spoelstra, so we don't know what's going to work out. We know that the success that Miami has is Jimmy Butler being a strong scorer, Bam Adebayo being a presence down low at the center spot, and then getting great shooting from guys like Tyler Hero, who's basically the sixth man of the year before the season even ends. I'm already penciling him in for that one. So I just think when it comes down to, postseason time, when you go back to the bubble, that's when they were at their best. Last year, when they played Milwaukee in that first round, they looked dead, absolutely dead. And, that's why you bring in guys like PJ Tucker, like Kyle Lowry to turn those things around. So I just want to see, when it gets down to the nitty gritty, we saw it last night, how well they can play defensively, but when there are these kind of frustrations, are we going to see more moments like that when you see Jimmy Butler get a little bit heated? We don't know that for sure, but I just think it's so tight that a good team like Miami, in my eyes, are the fourth best team in the Eastern Conference. But shifting conferences, let's go to the West. And as we talked about the top of the East, the bottom of the West is just as exciting. I mean, you got 3 teams fighting for the final 2 playoff spots. You got the Lakers, the Pelicans, and the Spurs. And I think everyone, and I mean everyone in the basketball world, has been talking about how bad Los Angeles looks right now. The Lakers are just, I haven't seen like a full game. I've seen like little snippets here and there, but they just look awful. They look awful. And they were on the outside looking in at one point, but thanks to a Spurs loss last night, they get themselves back in the 10th spot. And it's like, just when you think it can't get any worse, here they come with LeBron James spraining his ankle, joining Anthony Davis on the inactive list. This is a team that's lost 25 of 35 games. This is a team that was, at 500, and now they're 31 and 44. Okay. So, I mean, not even LeBron James, being the NBA's leading scorer at 30 points per game, can even save this team. And as I said, I watched little snippets, and it just doesn't look like they have the energy or the willingness to play together. And I think that's, that's nothing against any of the players, individually, because I'm the biggest Russell Westbrook advocate for this year in terms of not putting all of the blame on him. He does get, partial blame, not all of it, but just partial. But it's just the construction of the roster. You got a bunch of old, inexperienced guys. You've dealt with a bunch of injuries, and they just don't look, when you have Dwight Howard taking threes, your team isn't invested at all. And it's only going to get harder and harder for the Lakers because they have the toughest schedule left in the NBA. They're at Utah, home against New Orleans, home against Denver, at Phoenix, at Golden State, home versus Oklahoma City, and then at Denver. Okay, so it would not surprise me at all to see the Lakers get bounced from the play-in. It would not surprise me at all. And even if they do get into the play-in, I think they're going to be right then and out. They're going to be in and out just like that, And they just don't seem to want to play. They just don't seem to want to play with each other. And especially when you've got two teams like New Orleans and San Antonio who are slowly turning things around. I think, the Pelicans are in a good position, but they just can't let up. They're at the 9 spot. They're 2 up on San Antonio, who's on the outside looking in. They're not going to catch the Clippers, I don't think. They're 4 back of LA. But to see New Orleans, have that scoring and then getting better on defense, I think is what's helping them out and helping resurge it. Now, they're 33-43. I'm not saying it's a huge turnaround, but it's a turnaround nonetheless to get into the postseason. And then when you have San Antonio climbing back into things, full credit to Greg Popovich. This is a guy who's won 5 NBA championships. He's going to be a Hall of Famer. This team had won 4 straight before last night's loss against Memphis, which, by the way, was a layup away from keeping that spot. So, it's not a total sidetrack yet because it's only a matter of time before the Lakers blow another game. But I think when you look at San Antonio, it's just great offense from DeJounte Murray and Keldon Johnson. You got Lonnie Walker, the 4th, coming off the bench. This is, talk about getting hot at the right time. And they have been getting hot recently and just taking advantage of the poor play for the Lakers. Again, this all goes back to Los Angeles just playing so bad. And, I think New Orleans is a lock right now for the play-in. And I think San Antonio is going to find a way to get themselves into that 10th spot. That's what I think is going to happen in the Western Conference. And this is the time of the year where it gets really, really tight heading into postseason play. About a week and a half left of the regular season. And we've seen it this year that anything and everything can happen in the NBA. Now, of course, we have our big headlines that we got to talk about, but we've got some sub headlines as well that just have to get a mention and a discussion in this show. It is time once again for quick hits. And we start with maybe the most shocking news of the week, and that's Tiger Woods playing a practice round at Augusta a week before the Masters. This report came out that Tuesday he played a full 18 with his son Charlie, and he didn't, do the thing a couple of months ago where he took a cart and played with Charlie. He walked. And for those that watch the PGA in golf, Augusta's not an easy place to walk. It's very hilly. And this is a guy 14 months removed from leg and ankle surgery from just a horrific car accident. But this would it would be amazing for the PGA and golf in general to see Tiger Woods come back from such a devastating blow to a Hall of Fame career. I know he's at the tail end of his career, but to see Tiger back in the PGA, playing at the Masters, and especially with everything that's gone on with the PGA, with the comments from Phil Mickelson, with the threat of the Saudi Golf League. This would turn things around, and he wouldn't be a favorite in the tournament, but it would just be a feel-good moment to see him play one 18-hole round at Augusta during a tournament. I wouldn't even care nonetheless. It's a feel-good moment to see someone come back from such a devastating injury to see him play. And he's still listed as an expected participant, so we won't know until next week if one of the greatest golfers of all time decides to play in the biggest tournament in the PGA at Augusta. Back to basketball, we got to talk about the women's tournament, and they have been just as exciting as the men's side of things. I mean, what an instant classic between UConn and NC State in the Elite Eight. The Huskies going to their 14th straight Final Four with that 91-87 victory. 14 straight Final Four appearances is absolutely unreal, especially when you look at how the game was played. There were multiple times where the ending was rewritten. I mean, what? Jakia Brown-Turner, less than a second to go, corner three in the first overtime to send it to a second overtime. Unreal. Absolutely unreal. Game of the year, I think. And then just to see Paige Beckers for UConn come up clutch on the offensive side of things during overtime. 27 points for maybe the best player in the nation. Maybe. I say maybe because there are a lot of good candidates out there. But the women's Final Four is set as well. We got South Carolina and Louisville, followed by Stanford and UConn. And just out of those four teams right now, you got three number ones and then UConn, which is the number two. I think right now the Gamecocks will be my favorite just because of what they can do on both ends of the floor and what Dawn Staley has done with her squad. I mean, their defense has been incredible in the tournament so far, only allowing 41 points per game. And then you've got, the reason I say maybe about Paige Beckers is because you got Aaliyah Boston, who just won an award. I mean, she's just a force on both ends of the floor. 16, almost 17 points a game, 16 rebounds per game in 4 tournament games. And I think the test for South Carolina will be against Louisville. If they can get past Louisville, then I think they can beat Stanford. They can beat UConn. But, just as exciting as the men's side of things, the women's are just as exciting. To the NFL we go, and this is going to be kind of a two-parter because we heard the news about a rule change, and then just last night, a little bit of a coaching change. So to start, the NFL is making a change to overtime in the postseason. Ultimately, the Chiefs-Bills rule, essentially, where each team will get a possession if a playoff game goes to overtime. That means if someone goes and scores a touchdown, the other team does get a chance to get the ball and get it back. Now, I don't got a problem at all with this. I think, because it's only going to be in the playoffs, I don't see a problem with that kind of change. This will, it'll stop the whining from, like Bills Mafia and Chiefs Kingdom saying, oh, we would have won the Super Bowl if we got the ball in overtime against Tom Brady, against Patrick Mahomes. Yeah, right. There's still no excuse for the Chiefs and the Bills for letting that game go. But I don't have a problem with it at all. I don't see any problem. If this was going into the regular season, then it might be like, okay, you're pushing it a little bit. But the fact that it's only into a postseason, I think it's a good rule. And it could help teams like the Bucks possibly repeat and get their second Super Bowl in 3 years. But they're going to have to do it with a new head coach as Bruce Arians retires as the Bucks head coach and will move into the front office. That means defensive coordinator Todd Bowles is going to become the new head coach. And there is no doubt in my mind that Tom Brady had his hand in this kind of decision. He ultimately went up to ownership and said, you want me back? I want a new coach. I don't want Bruce Arians. Just because of, we've heard so much rift, when Tom Brady initially, he didn't explicitly say it or he didn't say anything right away, but, there were kind of some hidden messages. There was no doubt in my mind that Tom Brady was a factor in this decision, in Bruce Arians going from the sidelines to the front office. Quickly back to basketball, though, and there was another return from injury. Paul George, PG-13, returning at a great time for the Clippers ahead of the playoffs. It was his first game since a UCL tear in his elbow on December 22nd. He did have a minutes restriction, but 34 points on 10 of 20 shooting, including 6 of 9 from 3. put on that 6 assists, 4 steals, and helping his team come back from 25 points down to beat the Utah Jazz. Now, I would say that LA is locked. As I said in our first segment, they're locked into an 8th spot right now. They've lost 5 straight, but they did snap it with the win against Utah. I just don't think PG-13 is going to make a huge difference. I think they can get out of the postseason, or the play-in, I should say. I think they can beat whoever, they have a chance to beat whoever that 7th spot is. And even if they don't, I think they can easily beat the Lakers, the Pelicans, or the Spurs. But I think after that, they just can't get past the first round. I think they don't stack up with Phoenix. They don't stack up with Memphis. And I think just everyone in that Clippers organization, Steve Ballmer, the owner, Ty Lue, the coach, I think everyone knew that this was kind of a throwaway season once Paul George got hurt in December. You already haven't played Kawhi Leonard all season long. Obviously, he had the ACL injury. But to have PG-13, at least you have a chance to play spoiler. I don't think it's going to happen, but at least you have a chance with Paul George on the floor to, maybe rattle some things up come postseason time. And then finally, we go into baseball as they have just launched a sort of global fun, interactive sort of series. It's called Home Run Derby X. And what's going to happen is this is three different competitions will take place in London, England, Seoul, South Korea, Mexico City, and the rules are kind of confusing when you're trying to understand like the scoring system and stuff like that. But essentially, it's going to be the 4 oldest franchises in baseball with former players teaming up with rookies and softball stars. And it's just going to be kind of an interactive competition. So you got Adrian Gonzalez representing the Dodgers. You got Johnny Gomes representing the Red Sox, Nick Swisher for the New York Yankees, and Giovanni Soto for the Chicago Cubs. And I think this is sort of a great way for baseball to really grow the sport for young and international fans. I mean, I remember a few years ago, they went to London for a baseball game. They have a strong showing out in Japan and in China. But this is great for a young, international kind of crew. It's kind of a way to get the younger audience in there when you have sort of this competition like that. And not only that, you got the home run derby that's been kind of entertaining for the past couple of years. This is sort of Rob Manfred and all of them, trying to figure out how can we grow the game. And you already have some big superstars. Hopefully you didn't lose them because of the lockout. But I think this is a nice little interactive thing. And the best part is you got former players, you got the old and the new, past, present, future, I think is a good way to put it. And I like how interactive it's going to be. So I'm kind of one of those, wait and see. It sounds interesting, but we'll just see how it plays out once it gets underway. When their first competition, I guess, gets underway in the first couple of months. And that is a wrap up once again of Quick Hits. Now it is time once again to go local and talk about our teams. It's time for our Let's Get Local segment of the week. And I think everyone's got to start with the Boston Celtics. This was a team that got themselves into first place after being 18-21 back in December. They got to the top of the East and held it for a day, but they lost a huge asset along the way. They had a great performance against Minnesota on Sunday, but in that game, Robert Williams tearing his meniscus. That's the bad news. The good news is that he will miss 4 to 6 weeks, and there is hope. And the team is hopeful that he can be back for the second round of the playoffs if the Celtics can make it that far. And that is a huge, huge blow. I mean, this was a team, when you go back to the beginning of the year, dealt with so much injuries and so many shuffling around with multiple guys getting COVID, and just a bunch of injuries. Then when they had their full squad and they started to turn things around, especially defensively, it started and ended with the Time Lord. I mean, he was holding opponents to under 40% shooting as the closest defender. That's the best in the NBA. The best in the NBA. I mean, this is just a blow for a guy. And what's funny when you talk about, preseason expectations, you're thinking, okay, what can this team do when Robert Williams is healthy? And he was, for the most part of the year, healthy. He was playing in almost all of the games. And now here he comes with an injury at the worst time, especially when you have the East as tight as it is, as I mentioned. When you have Philly, Milwaukee, and Miami nipping at your heels. And, it's just, to me, I'm unsure of how far Boston can go without Robert Williams in the lineup. I think they can still beat any team. I think, an outlier could be the game in Toronto because they didn't have anybody. But I think, the fact that he will come back for the second round, or hopefully he can come back for the second round, is huge. That means in the first round, all you got to do, at least in my eyes, is avoid Philly, avoid Milwaukee, and avoid Brooklyn early on. As long as you don't get either of those teams in the first round, you get a sense of comfort that this team has the defensive depth that they can beat any team. I don't know. I love Daniel Tice, or I don't love Daniel Tice, but I think he's a good asset off the bench. I don't know how effective Al Horford, and Grant Williams are going to be on Joel Embiid, on Giannis, on Kevin Durant. I think those would be some players that are really hard to stop. But I think, as I said, the effort from a team on the defensive end of things, and then a much improved offense, I don't think that should change too drastically. But it kind of like makes your defense take a step back because you don't have that presence down low like Robert Williams, who's gotten just better and better as the season has gone along. But, this week was the first bit of action that the Celtics had to play without the Time Lord, and they dropped back-to-back games. They went into Toronto, and then last night they lost against Miami. Ironically enough, back-to-back losses is the first time they've lost consecutive games since January 19th and 21st. And if you go back, that was the last game that Marcus Smart had missed before the team had won 9 straight and just went on this masterful run. I mean, they were 23-24 at the time, and that was the last time they lost 2 consecutive games. But, as I said, Toronto was kind of an outlier game because Tatum, Brown, Horford, Rob Williams were all out, and everyone wants to make a big deal about, are the Celtics fully vaccinated if they got to play in Toronto? I'm just like, stop making it a bigger deal than it is. Stop making it a bigger deal than it is. No one, I'm done with, these vaccination rules and, all that crap like that. But the fact that their team went to overtime with Toronto was almost, I would say they were pretty much at full strength. The Celtics didn't have probably, 4 of their 5 top players playing in that game, and they still took it to overtime. So I think that's a good confidence boost if you're a Celtics fan, thinking that the sky is going to fall now that Robert Williams isn't going to play. But I wanted to focus a little bit more on Miami, the Miami game last night. I watched that game from start to finish, and that was just a killer. It was a killer because, again, the defense was playing incredible. You had Marcus Smart making incredible passes. Daniel Tice was playing well off the bench. I think it was 12 points in the game. But the problem was they just struggled offensively, and they just got kind of sucked into the officiating. I would say it was a poor officiated game on both sides of the things. I think the Celtics and the Heat both had their grievances, and I think justifiably so, with some of the calls, being a lot of ticky-tacky. But, Miami played just as good a defense as the Celtics. And you saw it in the numbers offensively. They just hadn't performed like they had. I mean, they only shot 41% from the field. This is a team that in weeks were averaging about like 50%, something like that. And they only shot 29.7% from 3. So it just wasn't going in. And then, you top that in with 18 turnovers. So it was just a good defensive play by Miami, and then just struggling offensively. And when you look at it, there were a lot of gimmies too. You had Grant Williams had some good looks under the basket. Horford had some good looks. But Jaylen Brown had a good game with 28 points. Tatum was a little bit off. It was just, the offense struggled and they got sucked into the officiating. And you kind of saw that, even Coach Ime Udoka said, we spent too much time complaining in the first half. And it kind of carried on that second half. They had a really bad fourth quarter. And then eventually, when the game was out of hand, Marcus Smart he talked too much and the referee just sent him packing with that ejection, which is kind of ridiculous to eject someone, for only one technical ejection for talking. That's ridiculous. So not a big fan of the officiating crew, but you can't put it all on the officiating crew. And now they've gone back to the number 4 spot. It's just about managing time without Rob Williams. That's going to be it, because I think right now they're locked into a top 4 spot. Just looking at the conference really quick, they've got 2.5 games up on Chicago and Toronto ahead of 5 and 6. And then in 7, they've got 4.5 up on Cleveland, who's in that 7th spot right now. So I think they're pretty much locked in to a top 4 spot right now, and home court at least in the first round. But I think for me, the outlook of the playoff is going to be dictated in that final 3 games of the regular season, just how well they perform at Chicago, at Milwaukee, at Memphis. How are those 3 games going to go? And obviously, the outlier is you don't have Rob Williams in the lineup, but how does this team rally around it? You still got Jason Tatum. You still got Jaylen Brown. Marcus Smart played incredibly well last night, I might add. I think this team has the depth. And I think they can get out of the first round. So I think we will see Robert Williams return to the court in the playoffs. And I think it will be in the second round. But in terms of championship outlook, I don't know yet. I'm not sure yet until I see it, play out in the postseason. So we'll just see, by this time, there'll only be a few games left in that regular season. How well will those Celtics do without Rob Williams? Only time will tell. Time will tell. But speaking of push to the postseason, the Bruins are doing the exact same thing. And, they're still climbing a little bit with about a month to go, less than a month to go in the season. And just, looking at the standings really quick, they're kind of right back to where they've been for a really long time. 87 points on the year, 41, 20, and 5 in that first wild card spot, 3 up on the Washington Capitals. And they do get a nice game against the Devils tonight, but what a tough game this past Tuesday against the Toronto Maple Leafs. I mean, they lost 6-4, being down 6-1 at some point in the second period, but in the first period they were down 3-1. And I go back to that, just another slow start, and they just didn't play a really good game to start out. 7 penalties for 22 minutes, 12 giveaways of the puck. I mean, I say it all the time. Another slow start, some really bad turnovers, and it just looked like they were overpowered physically. And they had their chances. As I said, they were down 6-1. They got it close. They got it to 6-4 with, I want to say, maybe 2 minutes left to go in regulation. So they had their chances. They had their chances against Toronto, but it was just too little too late. And we've seen, that's just what I go to every single time the Bruins drop a game like that, is they just have slow starts and they just don't come out with the right kind of energy in games like this. So, they're physically getting better. The trade for Hampus Lindholm really helps out. They're getting better, but it's a 60-minute game. You got 3 20-minute periods. And they played well for the final 30 minutes instead of, maybe the 50-minute mark. And that's sort of been the MO of the Bruins, is just slow starts kill them. And that's what we're seeing here against a team that might be catching fire like Toronto. And what stinks, if you're a Bruins fan, is that you had the chance to leapfrog the Tampa Bay Lightning all the way up to second place in the Atlantic. But now, because of that loss and just some bad stretches of games, you're back into that first wild card spot, clinging to, hoping that you get out of the wild card and you get, maybe some home ice. As I said, though, you get a nice, easy home matchup against the New Jersey Devils. And then you get a home game against the Columbus Blue Jackets, who, they're the last team eliminated from the Eastern Conference playoffs. But come on, They're at 69 points. The Capitals are at 84 points. No one's going to catch them. No one's going to catch them. So you got those 2 games before that 4-game road trip. But on the positive side of things for the Bruins, I like what I'm seeing from the 3rd and 4th lines. I like seeing the energy from Foligno, Nosek, Trent Frederick, Smith, and Curtis Lazar. I like seeing that. I like seeing that from this team. And, I don't think offense and energy was a huge problem for the Bruins when they have sort of had their struggles. It's just been sort of defense and physicality. So when you're seeing, this kind of energy from, your back half lines, all you got to do is just improve physically, and then you'll be right back to where you want to be. And the good news is that there's still, as I said, it's less than a month. It's a 2-point gap between Toronto and Boston and a 3-point gap between Tampa and Boston. So there's still time to make that up. But when you're looking at what happened this past week, it was not pretty. And we'll see if the Bruins can turn things around starting tonight when they take on the New Jersey Devils. But lastly, and let's get local, we got to talk about the Patriots because the head coach and the owner have made their first public comments at the coaches meeting of the offseason so far. And what we've heard from Bill Belichick is that there will not be any coordinators this season. Joe Judge, Matt Patricia are going to be involved heavily on offense. And according to Bill, he doesn't like titles. I say this every single week we talk about the Bruins. I don't have a clue what Bill's strategy is here going on for having this team grow. I don't know what it is. I don't know if there are young guys that just haven't played as best as we think they can. I don't know what it is, but I know for sure that teams of success had anchors in the coaching staff, okay? On the offensive side of the things, you had Josh McDaniels. On the defensive side of things for a couple of years, you had Romeo Crennel. Then you had Matt Patricia at one point. You had these anchors. And why it's not happening this year, I don't know. Because this is a team that still has to grow. You still have a quarterback going into his 2nd year. You're coming off a year in which you spent basically your whole salary on a couple of guys. So I don't know what the strategy is for Bill Belichick. I feel like we need to hear more from him for what his strategy is. And maybe we'll get those answers at training camp when, we see which players are playing along the first team or playing on the second team. I think that's really when we're going to figure out, okay, this is what Belichick is doing with his strategy on both sides of the ball. But that's what his coach said. His owner, by the way, said that he is bothered by recent playoff failures of this Patriots team. And I'm not trying to be Captain Obvious here, but if you have been a fan of this team for the last 20 years, of course you'd feel that way. Of course you would feel bothered that you were basically the best team in the last 20 plus years. And now here you are getting out of the wild card twice and missing the playoffs all in all. Because you got to remember, the last playoff win this team had was their Super Bowl win against the Rams back at Super Bowl 53. And I get it. New England fans aren't used to a rebuilding situation. We've seen it plenty of times recently with the Celtics and with the Red Sox. We've seen rebuilding, but Patriots fans are not used to a rebuilding. You got to go all the way back to the 90s, the pre-Tom Brady era, when you had to go through sort of a rebuilding situation. So I get where Robert Kraft is coming from. I get where the owner is, because you want to go back to that success. You want it to last for another 20 years, and then another 20 years after that, and another 20 years after that. Of course, you would feel bothered by these playoff failures, but we'll just see what Bill Belichick can do to turn his owner's feelings around. Because if you are anyone in the city of Boston, if you are a Boston fan, as I say over and over, success is the number one priority. we always do to wrap up the show, it's our LOL moment of the week. And before we get into this week's moment, we got to bring up again the ultimate LOL moment bracket. Okay, we are down to the final four moments from all 64, the previous 64 episodes, I should say, of the moment. We are down to Mike Evans, Sergio Romo, Tom Brady, and Manny Ramirez. Okay, we are down to those four stories and those four moments right there. And if you missed it, on our Instagram at @LetMeSpeak_official, we will be releasing the final four on Friday, tomorrow when this podcast is released. And then we will have the championship matchup be released on Sunday, and we'll announce the winner by this time next week on the 68th edition, the 68th episode of Let Me Speak. So tune in for that and keep voting on all our social media platforms. But to talk about this week, it's kind of a blast from the past in a very unique way, I'll add. So this week's LOL moment of the week goes to Bill Lee. 75-year-old Bill Spaceman Lee is a former Red Sox legend, and he returned to the field. Yes, he took the mound in an actual baseball game. And how does it happen? Well, if you look at the video online at Twitter, YouTube, wherever you want to find it, 75-year-old Bill Spaceman Lee emerges from the crowd. He's holding a cup of beer like he would in any other baseball game, and he's taking the field for the Savannah Bananas. He goes into the mound. He goes onto the mound for the Bananas, and he strikes out a guy. And of course, he had the infamous eephus pitch, which you don't know is basically a lob in. It's basically kind of like a rainbow shot if you don't know what an eephus pitch is. But a 75-year-old man, 75-year-old baseball legend, came back to the mound and struck out a guy. Unreal. Absolutely unreal. You got to go all the way back to the 1970s when this guy pitched, okay? He even started a World Series game for the Boston Red Sox against the Cincinnati Reds. And it was just unreal to see. Unreal to see that a guy this age is back playing baseball and pitching on the mound. Now, the backstory kind of on this, if you don't know about the Savannah Bananas, they are from the Coastal Plain League, which is essentially a minor league team, kind of similar to the Cape Cod Baseball League. If you don't know what that is, it's a bunch of college players or minor league players. They sign up and they play a whole season. And pretty much what the Bananas are, they're similar to the Harlem Globetrotters. They're the Harlem Globetrotters of baseball because this team is as entertaining as it gets. If you look online at everything they've done since they became a team, you see your players get involved with fans. They have choreographed dances. They just introduced a brand new interactive rule where if a fan catches a foul ball, that player is out. And it's pretty much a circus atmosphere with the Savannah Bananas. And ultimately, that's how you get, a new audience, a younger audience into baseball, is that you have fun, interactive moments like this. You get guys like a 75-year-old former MLB player return to the mound and strike out a young, athletic baseball player. That's how you get fans, is you just have this kind of atmosphere. So it's kind of hard to describe what the Savannah Bananas actually do and how they get so many eyes on them. But basically, they put on a circus, and they're the Harlem Globetrotters of baseball, because they don't make going to a baseball game there a time. They make it an experience. They are very interactive with the fans, with the players. There was a video. I was ultimately going to have a viral moment where a guy hit a guy doing a split. He got a hit while he was standing at home plate, and he did the splits, and he still got a hit. So that was going to be the moment I was going to pencil in there. But to see Bill Spaceman Lee, I know my dad has had multiple stories about him and the things that he did while he was pitching for the Boston Red Sox from the late 60s into the late 70s. So he's definitely a character. I mean, you're not just called Spaceman for a reason. So Bill Spaceman League for returning to the baseball mound at 75 years old for maybe the most entertaining thing going on in baseball. The Savannah Bananas has earned yourself into this week's LOL Moment of the Week. So that wraps it up for this edition of Let Me Speak. Thank you everyone for watching. If you're watching us on YouTube or listening to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, make sure as always you follow our social media pages on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. All you got to do is search Let Me Speak Podcast. And remember, as always, if you got a point you got to get across, just let the whole world know. Shut up and let me speak.